Hi, everybody. It's Mike. It is late May as I'm recording this, and as you know, we're still in mourning of our beloved Gordon Lightfoot. But I did promise that we'd be coming out with a new episode around this time, and so we are. 3 quick disclaimers I wanted to make about this episode. First is that when Adele was talking about one of Gordon's children being taken with her, she said Miles. That is a mistake. It was actually Eric. Also, we recorded this before Gordon died. So if we're talking about things in the present tense, please understand that there's a context to that. The third thing I'd like you to know is that we're splitting this episode into 2 pieces because Adele and I enjoyed our conversation so much about Whispers of the North that we didn't realize we'd gone on for an hour. So this is part 1 of our conversation. The second part will be coming out in the middle of June. All right, on with the show. It's good to be back.
The first guest of the evening is truly a poet. He's an artist. He is a friend and an inspiration to anyone who I think who has ever played the guitar or tried to write poetry. Would you please welcome Gordon Lightfoot?
Whispers of the North. Soon I will go forth to that wild and barren land where nature takes its course. This is Carefree Highway Revisited, the show that celebrates the work of Gordon Lightfoot song by song, a proud member of the That's Not Canon podcast network. I'm your host, Mike Messner, and with me today is a fellow Lightfoot fan, making her 3rd appearance on the show from Kapawa, Quebec, Adele Chalifoux. Adele, welcome back. It's good to see you again.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to be back. I'm hoping to make world records of your longest guest ever.
You mean the most appearances?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. Well, we'll continue to work on that.
Okay.
Now, the last time you were on the show was a little over a year ago. And when that happened, I think you had just become a mother for the first time. So how is your little one? And remind us of his name and the significance of it.
Well, little Simon Gordon is fantastic. He is 1.5 years now, so he's full-fledged feral toddler. So send help if you would like. It's been fantastic. I wanted his first name to be Gordon, but I lost that.
Yeah, you
middle
did.
Name it went.
Yeah, I think his dad probably had a thing or two to say about that, but that is perfectly okay. We're going to be talking about Whispers of the North and what it means to each one of us. And I have my own thoughts on it, but why did you want to talk about this song in particular today?
Well, this song, I think, is probably top 2 favorites of mine of all of the Lightfoot songs. As a Canadian and as a Northerner especially, it has always just meant so much to me from the first time I heard it. Just the descriptions of his words, and it's kind of like I had lived and breathed this song as a French Canadian with my ancestors going back to the first settlers of New France and, of course, Indigenous roots. And of course, the Voyagers. The song truly kind of evokes in me a sense of wonder, and it's almost ethereal. It makes me think of what life must have been like in the early days, predating any sort of settlers, and just how quiet and mysterious the forests were, and the only sounds were the oars dipping into the waters. And it's just so majestic, I guess. And it always just has touched me as someone who's grown up in the wilderness and in the bush. I mean, right now, I'm coming to you right smack in the middle of bushland. We live on a lake, and it brings just so many fond, wonderful memories of even when I was a kid growing up at our cottage. Our dad used to take us canoeing early in the morning as we were young girls. We just look at the nature, watch the sunrise. It just brings a lot of really fantastic memories and just gives me a almost visceral reaction whenever I hear it. So that's a long-winded answer. It's just one of my favorites.
So it sounds like it's really personally evocative for you,
Yes.
Having lived and grown up in that area and to experience the same kinds of sensations.
Right.
Me being removed in all kinds of ways from it, I think to me, I'm looking at it on a Lightfoot timetable. And even on an album where he was really looking for a more contemporary sound and brought in people to produce and play on the Salute record, he hasn't lost his touch for folk music or folk sounding music. And also, he's still able to talk about the Canadian wilderness in a meaningful way. Even in the 1980s, which was not known for being real focused on the environment. That happened more in the 70s and again in the 90s, but he's still got it. He still has that spirit inside him, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. You mentioned your memories growing up. Can you say just a little bit more about what this recalls for you when you listen to the song?
Sure. So on my father's side of his family, his grandfather and his mother's family were involved in the fur trade, and they were furriers. So because of that, we have lots of stories and write-ups of the things that my great-grandfather experienced being in the fur trade in Northern Ontario and the Indigenous peoples that he came across. And in our family, he had bought about 100 acres or so of land in the bush on a lake in Northern Ontario. And our family built a cottage, and that's where a lot of my French family from Montreal and various places around Quebec would come, and we would amalgamate in the summertime. Each family had their own cottage type of thing. And for us, my sister and I, we were there every summer with my grandmother, spending right after school got out to Labor Day weekend. We were there with her, running just feral and wild, pine sap in our hair and stuck on our bodies, climbing trees, going swimming. Dad would take us on canoe rides. We had electricity, we had running water, but that was it. It was outhouse. It was that sort of thing. All our supplies had to be boated in. And it was just magnificent hearing the stories of my grandmother, of her parents when they built the cottages, and going to sleep with the spooky sounds of loons on the lake, which we'll talk about, you and me, but seeing the full moon over the lake on the water, and just all these amazing stories, and just being at the mercy of nature, really. Because if there was a storm, there was a storm. If our power got knocked out, well, it was a fire, candles type of thing. So it was a wonderful way to grow up, and we never wanted to go home, actually. we just loved it so much.
I can't say as I blame you. I mean, it seems like just a perfect place to spend a summer, growing
magical.
up. Yeah, growing up in the circumstances that you did. So
Absolutely.
This could almost be the theme song to Adele Chalifoux's childhood. Yeah?
Yeah, actually, it absolutely would. I wish my grandmother actually was still alive, because I'm sure she would have loved this song. I'm sure she would have really connected with it as well.
Well, I'm sure she would also have enjoyed listening to you on my podcast. What is your ideal setting in listening to the song? Time of day, activity, location, any setting that you wanted to create to listen to Whispers of the North?
That's a hard one. Let me just say, any setting is perfect to listen to Gord. Okay, we all know that, obviously.
Yeah.
But for me, it would probably be for sure at a lake house or cottage or a camp. Probably early morning when the sun is just coming up. You can see the sunrise and the colors over the horizon, or early evening, which is about twilight, which is usually when the loons come out and they start calling. And you can hear the calls echoing over the water. It's just kind of like this spooky in-between time. That's probably maybe like spring, summer, or even sitting on a deck on the water, listening to this during a nice warm summer day, and just kind of overlooking the water and just really imagining the images and feeling the song. That's probably the best. Or on a boat or a canoe, obviously. But you might be a little bit busy on a boat or a canoe to be listening to music. But that's probably my ideal situation.
That sounds perfect. And I agree. I could listen to it almost any time. For me, My trips north are not quite as adventurous as yours were, but my in-laws live in the very far north of California, right on the coast. I mean, just about as close as you can get and not be in Oregon is how, close there. Every summer, sometimes my family drives up and then I fly, or sometimes they fly and I drive up, and sometimes we all go together. But I can think of myself listening to this song as I'm driving through the redwoods and realizing, okay, I'm going to be in a world that is very different from the San Francisco Bay Area, and that I'm not necessarily used to, but is such a great escape from the pressures of living in Silicon Valley that it's someplace that I always look forward to. So it is whispers of the North. It's just a different kind of North.
It's just a different North. There's a North of everywhere, right? To quote Doctor Who, there's a North of everything and everywhere. So it doesn't matter. The North is the North.
The North is the North, and it's always got treasures, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
We'll be right back to our conversation with Adele Chalifoux about Whispers of the North. But first, a word from a podcast partner or two.
Hi, this is Audie Martello, the host of the Mostly Folk podcast, a 60-minute foray into the music we all love. You will hear newly released albums, classic folk, country, and bluegrass music, as well as some traditional music that may or may not be true to the genre. Sometimes irreverent, often opinionated, but always entertaining. You may even hear a radio magic trick every so often, as well as numerous interviews via Zoom and telephone with established as well as indie artists. Mostly Folk is available wherever you listen to podcasts, and always at mostlyfolk.org.
Victorian Periodical Parade.
Hey, this is our new podcast. We're going to make this podcast. It's going to be Victorian. It's going to be new. It's going to be us reading and then breaking it down in the same episode. Be excited. Listen to these horror stories that are actually going to be similar to your life today. This is the transition episode where we go from YouTube, Facebook into the podcast. This is what we're planning on doing. We have content already. Go ahead and watch, listen on YouTube and Facebook. But now it's pretty much just audio only. So we're going to bring it to you in an audio format. And here it is. We're going to narrate a book, and then we're going to break it down into the things that you have learned about the Victorian era, and then the crossover between the Victorian era everyday life to the 21st century everyday life, right?
Victorian Periodical Parade. Victorian Periodical Parade.
Now, you did a little bit more digging on the origins of this song than I could. I did look through Nicholas Jennings' biography, and the song is only mentioned, I think, 2 or 3 times. And it's always in the context of the Salute album, not necessarily in the composition of the song. So what did you find out about how Gordon sat down and wrote this song?
I, like you, looked through the Jennings book, which is a phenomenal book. So everyone go out and buy it and read it. From what I've read, the song was written shortly after Gordon returned from his 9th canoe trip to Kazan River in Nunavut here in Canada. And it is stated that before this trip, exactly timeline, not sure, but before this trip, his fiancée, Kathy Coonley, actually had left him. She took their infant son. I do believe he was 9 months old or so, they say in the book, and she left him due to issues with his drinking. So she left him, and then shortly, I guess after that, he quit drinking. He stopped drinking, I guess, for the last time, and successfully stopped. And then he went on his canoe trip. So it sounds to me, from what I got from the book, that he used some of the lyrics in this particular song really make me think that he used that particular canoe trip as inspiration for the song. But I'm sure a lot of his canoe trips were probably inspiration for the song. So that was the only thing I could really find, which is too bad because I would have loved to known more about his creative process and where this all came from. But that's all I could find, unfortunately.
Well, we know that he wrote a lot of songs either on the canoe trips or shortly after the canoe trips because it was such a great solace for him and it gave him a lot of inspiration. We know Shadows was written in the context of one of those. I knew that Kathy Coonley had been in the picture, and I knew that he was separated from his second wife, Elizabeth, around this same time. So there is kind of a feeling of heartbreak in the song. Of course, it's not a sad song, but you can tell that there's just a little bit of melancholy that even though he's out in, as you said, the bush, the wilderness, way, way away from Toronto and everything else that was happening in his professional life, you can't run away from yourself. And
no, of course,
bringing that, along with him, and it's in his blood. It was underneath what he was writing at that particular time.
Of course. And I think especially living here in the bush, like we're pretty isolated. You can't help but feel lonely sometimes, even though you're surrounded by all this beauty and life. Being a stay-at-home mom right now, kind of stuck, in this sort of situation. It's lonely and it's hard, and you can't help but think, right? You can't help but replay memories and go over the what ifs I could have, all that stuff. So perhaps that played into a part, because when you're paddling in a canoe for 9 to 12 hours a day, you have a lot of time to think. So I'm sure that did come up. And I also actually read that even during his relationship with the second Kathy, we should call her, he was also still thinking of the prior Kathy, who was a big force in his life. So that's a lot to wrestle with when you're just at the mercy of the quietness and stillness of your own mind.
Well, not only that, you mentioned that he's quitting drinking for the last time. And for anybody who's trying to kick an addiction, it's a time of a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of looking back at the missed chances of your life. And fortunately, he didn't write a whole song about that, because I don't think either you or I would want to talk about that very much.
Yeah, no.
But I think it was certainly on his mind, and we'll never know exactly what his train of thoughts were, but there were elements of a lot of the things that we've talked about here.
Absolutely.
So now let's look at the lyrics a little bit. Whispers of the North, soon I will go forth. So he's anticipating a trip back to the wilderness, to one of his canoe trips. And he's setting it in a way that this is before the trip, but he may have written it either during or after. Or maybe he wrote pieces of it in all three of those. But he's back where he loves to be, and where he's found his connection, and where his muse, if you will, really exists, is in, the northern part of Ontario and other places in that area of Canada. To that wild and barren land where nature takes its course. And the contrast that I thought of is that if you're in the big cities, and in this case, it would have been Toronto or someplace in the States, humanity is bending nature to its course. You think about The Last Resort by the Eagles. You think about manipulating nature or taking control of nature, dominating nature. Whereas here, nature has free reign. It's not being dominated by anything or anyone else. Am I on track with that?
I think so. I think it's really interesting the way, the different ways we both look at it. You're coming at it from a big city kind of guy, in the heart of, I don't want to say civilization, but more people than I have around me, let's say. And I'm coming at it from more of a bush, a bush rustic kind of idea. And for me, when he says, soon I will go forth, to me, it's like the initial push off to when you get into a canoe or a boat or a kayak or anything like that. You have to kind of jump in as you're pushing off the shore. So that's, to me, is like the initial, here we go into the river or the lake or whatever. And I love the word where the nature takes its course, because it makes me think of how, and especially living out here, I mean, we have a generator, we lose power all the time. So we're at the mercy of nature, even in 2023. Nature it's wild, it's unpredictable, it's fickle, and it can be even destructive at points. Weather conditions can change at any moment. Like I said, we live on the lake. So 1 minute it could be beautiful and sunny and, all these things. And then 2 seconds later, it's windy, it's gusty, it's storming. You can see the storm coming in from the other side of the lake. So you're at the whim of nature. And it's kind of beautiful. It's very humbling because as humans, we like to be in charge, but it's not like that when you live on the land or on the water or things like that. So it's just such a good play on words. I just love it.
Yeah, there's a great quote from the movie The Man from Snowy River talking about the Australian outback, and it's applicable here too. The wilderness changes so suddenly. 1 minute it's like paradise, and the next it's trying to kill you. And I think that really kind of sums up. And that movie came out around the same time that this album came out.
We'll be right back to our conversation with Adele Chalifoux about Whispers of the North. But first, a word from a podcast partner or two. Hey, I just wanted to take a second to tell you about my latest podcast discovery. Firebreathing Kittens is an actual play one-shot podcast that plays various tabletop role-playing games with a season-long plot. Because there's a beginning and an end to each week's story, you can start at any episode. Yeah, you won't miss a thing. Every week has a different combination of 4 from the same rotating cast of people. Join Firebreathing Kittens as they solve detective mysteries, attempt comedic banter, and enjoy friendship. That's Firebreathing Kittens podcast. Check it out.
Attention listeners, the oldest record store in Toronto wants to buy your record collection. Kopps Records is run by and for collectors. They know just how much heart goes into compiling your favorite music. Whether the vinyl belongs to you, a loved one, or a friend, they'll bring their 40 years of experience and sensitivity to every transaction. If you're thinking of selling a collection, visit Kopps Records, that's Kopps with a K, records.ca, or call them at 647-347-0095. You can also visit Kopps at one of their 3 locations in the Toronto area. Whispers of the wind, soon I will be there again, bound with a wild and restless drive that pulls me from within. And he feels a spiritual connection to this region, and he's really impatient to get back there. He may have felt at that particular time cooped up or stifled, or I've had it with the music business for a little while. He certainly was at 6s and 7s with his relationships, both with his wife from whom he was separated and with his fiancée, Kathy Coonley, maybe from his kids also.
Yeah.
But he knows he's going to feel at home in the wilderness.
I honestly think that if our Gord didn't end up to be a songwriter, I think he would have been a woodsman or a bushman, living on just some acreage of property and just living his life, chopping trees and doing things like that. I really feel like, yes, music is one side of his personality where he feels comfortable and at home. But I feel like being in the wilderness, you really connect. And I really feel that that's where his spirit is. He even talks about it as being a child in Aurelia, going out to the bush and connecting with nature. And I really feel like that's the other half of him. If he wasn't in music, he would be living off the land somewhere.
Yeah, and he even mentioned that in 16 Miles to 7 Lakes, which we did not that long ago on this show. I'm going to build a cabin in the woods and I'm going to forget. So he really feels like he's making new starts in some way every time he goes out there. And we can ride away, we can glide all day, and we can fly away. So now he's using the plural first person. He's using we, not just me, which implies that he's bringing somebody with him. And it makes me wonder, who is he talking about? And then I also realized, okay, he's riding, he's gliding, he's flying. All of those mean motion. And they don't necessarily imply that he's cooped up or that there are any limits, because he says he can do that all day. It's romantic, but I'm wondering, who does he want to bring with him? Do you have any thoughts?
Honestly, we love our Gord, and we know that he loved women. He loved his ladies. So it could be his kids. But I really feel like I know that Kathleen Coonley went on at least one canoe trip with him, but she would go on a lot of trips with him when he was sailing around Georgian Bay. She would go with him for that. So, I think part of it is probably Kathleen, number two, but I think a little bit of him was probably missing his initial Kathy because she played such a huge, important role in his life. So maybe both. Maybe both.
Yeah. And again, we'll never know exactly who he was talking about, but there's absolutely no question that Kathy Smith made as big an impression as any of the ladies that he'd been involved with in any context, marriage, out of marriage, one night stands.
Yes. Yeah, they were just toxic for each other, but we've all been there, right? We've all had that person where, yeah, it's bad news, but you can't help the way you feel. I would just also like to say the words that he used, like glide and fly. I mean, if you've ever been in a canoe, it does feel like you're flying and you do glide over the water. And it just really, for me, because I'm a lover of early Canadian history, it harkens back to me, the voyageurs in their canoes and how fast they had to, how many paddle strokes an hour and things like that. So, I mean, he's just a master writer, really, with the words he chooses.
Yeah. And I think of the coureur de bois. That is something that we study in American history a little bit.
Oh, yes, you have them too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Whispers of the North. Soon I will return again to those endless afternoons in sunshine and in rain. Now, why do you think he's using the word endless? I mean, is that because the afternoon is very, very long and the sun doesn't go down until about 8 o'clock at night? Why did he use that term?
Again, just a perfect word to use. If we're going at it by the angle of he just returned from his trip to Nunavut, Nunavut is quite north, along with here in Canada, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and then there's Nunavut. Those places are called Land of the Midnight Sun for a reason. So in the summertime, they would be having, I did some research on June 21st, so solstice, longest day of the year in Nunavut, they get 21 hours of sunlight on that particular day. So it could be a nod to the insane amount of sunlight that he's getting. It could be a nod to how long they're paddling for. To go back again to the voyageurs, for instance, they got very little sleep because they paddled as long as they could, stopped, I think, at somewhere after 10, 11 p.m., and then they were back at it at 3, 4 a.m. in the morning. So could be a nod to that. It could be maybe a nod that he felt like he never wanted it to end. It could be many things. Who knows?
I've had a little bit of experience with the Land of the Midnight Sun, not in Canada, but in Alaska. I've been there twice, and the first time I was able to sleep with no problem. Second time, didn't sleep for a week. And yeah, and with all due respect to my friends up north, I was miserable by the end of about the fifth day. Yeah, I just wanted to go home.
Absolutely. I did actually live in Alaska for a brief period, and looking outside at night at 11 o'clock at night and it's still sunny, it's not for the faint of heart. So I'm with you there.
Yeah. And I've told Nancy, if we ever go up there again, we are getting a hotel room that has a very thick curtain, or I'm not going. I'm not staying at anybody's house this time. It's not going to happen.
Absolutely.
Whispers of my love, days and weeks on end, I will share my thoughts of her in prayers that I will send. So now he's missing his woman. We've already said we don't really know which woman. And she is clearly not there, or he wouldn't be missing her. But then in prayers that I will send. Now, Gordon has never been a particularly religious guy. So where is the idea of prayers coming from? Any thoughts on that?
So from my research, and I found it was pretty amazing, it kind of goes back to Kathleen Coonley. I also found interesting that I did not know that Daylight Katie, phenomenal song, and Dream Street Rose, one of my other favorite songs, was actually written for Kathleen, which I think, neat, eh? So while they were together, she actually convinced Gord to start going to church. And Gord would sing at, I don't know if it was a midnight mass, it just said he would sing Christmas Eve at this church. And this is apparently a tradition that still holds strong to this day. So perhaps Gord was becoming more spiritual. I think it's really tough to be in nature and on the land and not feel spiritual just because of everything that's around you. So maybe there's a connection there.
Could well be. I think for me, although I'm fairly deeply steeped in Christian spirituality, I have a little bit of a transcendentalist in me, that when I'm out in the wilderness or away from a city, that I do feel a certain connection to nature. And to me, that is the fingerprints of God. And I think a lot of American transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson really felt that very closely. So I think he probably is having, again, a spiritual, I don't want to say euphoria, but maybe something like that.
Absolutely. You know. It could actually even be that Gord, being from Aurelia, a lot of Indigenous people, a lot of Indigenous friends, and their views of nature are very different than a lot of other people's views of nature, right? So their creator is in kind of everything. It could have been that influence as well.
That about wraps up part 1 of our conversation about Whispers of the North. Part 2 will be coming out in the middle of June. Till then, this is Mike Messner reminding you, run for the roses, but don't forget to stop and smell them. We'll see you next time.